Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back. We're going to begin reading our new book, The Essenes, Children of the Light, and this is written by Stuart Wilson and Joanna Prentis. So we're going to be reading part 1 because it's pretty short, part 2, and probably part 3. And in my introduction, I did introduce the people that this book is based around, and I think I got one of the names wrong, so let me correct myself. So Rowena is Joseph of Arimathea, or a soul aspect of Joseph of Arimathea, which they did explain in the introduction. Stuart is Daniel ben Ezra, John is Luke, Roberta is the silent one, and Martha, they never get a name from Martha. I just wanted to correct that. Okay, so part 1, the process begins. Their lifelong purity, their avoiding of oaths or falsehood, their recognition of a good providence alone showed their love of God. Their love of virtue revealed itself in their indifference to money, worldly position, and pleasure. Their love of man in their kindliness, their equality, their fellowship, passing all words. This comes from Philo of Alexandria, writing about the Essenes in 20 CE. And chapter 1, first meeting with Daniel. I had been working with Stuart for over 4 years, and we had explored a number of his past lives. In each case, there had been detailed recall, as he is one of the best subjects I have worked with. He has the ability when regressed to talk for some time with very little prompting, which makes the process much easier for me. Although we worked intensively on the Daniel sessions, the main story still took over 6 weeks to work through, and we returned for more regression at 4 later stages to add more detail to the text. So I'm assuming when we're talking about Stuart, we're actually talking about Stuart Wilson, who also brought forth the channeling of Ilariel, who is the angelic being that helped fill in so many of the gaps in Power of the Magdalene. Stuart had already explored one Essene life in the Damascus community around 100 BCE. This is his brief summary of that life. In the Damascus community, we were preparing for the coming of a great teacher. It was a simple life, a balance of physical work and growing crops with the study of the works of the great sages as contained in the scrolls. In the evening, we would eat together, then gather around a large fire and share our thoughts and feelings about the day. We did not know when the teacher of righteousness would come, but we wished to be well prepared so we could help in his work. To that end, we also helped other communities to establish themselves, partly by writing down our experiences of running our community in the form of general instructions and guidance. There were rules, and these we had developed over a period of time. We thought it was important to share our experiences in this way, for groups setting up a community would not know what kind of structure might work, and what rules were necessary to help the community become a cohesive whole. There is no replacement for practical experience. We felt that if other groups of people following our way could establish the teacher, could be established, the teacher would be able to find willing hearts and helpful hands in many places, and that would benefit the work as a whole. This account is fascinating because it seems to be a description of how and why the Damascus document, a key Essene text, was written. Here we get the feeling of being in at the very start of the whole Essene experience. I knew it was possible that Stuart might have had another Essene life, so I put him into an altered state of consciousness and asked him to connect with the life immediately following the Damascus one. I begin by asking him his name. So again, we're going to go like an interview. So it's going to be, I'll say the person's name who's speaking, and then we'll go from there. So Stuart says, "My name is Daniel. Some say that Daniel is not a good name because it means God is my judge. They say it is a hard name, but they do not understand it. It means you will only be judged by God, and God knows what is in your heart. So to me, it is a comfortable name. It means you will be judged with the full knowledge of your being, what is in your heart, not what seems to be on the outside. This was a piece of luck. Daniel certainly sounded like a Jewish name, but was he an Essene? I decided to go cautiously and ask first about his father. Joanna, and what is your father's name? Daniel. My father's name is Ezra, so I am Daniel ben Ezra. My father was an elder in our community. Joanna, is your father still alive? Daniel, no, he died before I had 30 years. He seemed to be interested in names, so I asked him what his father's name meant. Daniel, my father's name means salvation. We see salvation as a continuous thing. We are always being protected from those things that lead us away from the truth, away from the light. So we see it as a step-by-step, day-by-day thing. We are always being saved. I noticed he said we see rather than I see. Maybe it was just the closeness of his community, but I decided I would be bold and follow this up in a quite direct way. Joanna, is your community an Essene one? There was a long pause. At last, Daniel answered, yes. I realized from the length of the pause that I had to tread carefully here, so I tried to reassure him. Joanna, we are interested in the Essenes, have sympathy with their beliefs, and wish them well. Daniel, that is good. There are many people who do not wish us well. Joanna, is your community a large one? And Daniel says, no, it is not the largest. Joanna, how many people live in your community? And Daniel, quite sharply, he says, it is not permitted that I speak of this. So if you followed me in Power of the Magdalene, I did mention that Daniel was very secretive and protective of his community. And that is very apparent early on. And they then get him to open up, and we'll find out how a little bit later on. That was another signal for me to go carefully. Although I knew the Essenes were highly secretive, I was not at all sure what subjects they were sensitive about, so I just had to feel my way. I thought I had better stay away from the subject of the community for the moment and ask about Daniel himself. Joanna, are you married? Daniel says, no, I am a single one. It is only a small sacrifice for me, and I have many friends around me. I made some more tentative inquiries in the first session, but nothing more of interest emerged. By the end of the session, I was already feeling the restrictions of Essene secrecy close in around me. If there were many forbidden areas, how we were ever to progress properly? I was beginning to think that, despite a promising start, this life might not add very much to our knowledge about the mysterious Essenes. The conventional view of the Essenes is recorded by the historian Josephus and by Philo of Alexandria and the elder Pliny. They described the Essenes as gathering in rural communities and balancing hard work in agriculture with communal study of moral and religious questions. They paid much attention to ceremonial purity and held property in common. These writers give a general picture of the Essene as an ascetic, pious, and pacifist group, quite detached from political issues and commercial pressures. More modern writers have taken a broader view of the Essenes, seeing them as a widespread movement of anti-Jerusalem nonconformists. Here the Essenes become a fluid, ill-defined, and changeable group, in contrast to the more structured and organized conventional Jews. In this perception, the Essenes might embrace a wide range of views, from the pacifist and the pious to the most extreme and violent anti-Roman militancy. All right, and now, as I said, the first few chapters are pretty short, so we're just being introduced to a few of the people here. So the next one is Rowena, who carries soul aspects of Joseph of Arimathea, who is Mary's brother and Jeshua's uncle. Okay, so chapter 2, Rowena. A week after the first session with Daniel, I had arranged another appointment with a client who had already explored several lives. We will call her Rowena, although that is not her name. She has asked for her identity not to be disclosed. Rowena is middle-aged, on the surface a fairly outgoing person, open-minded and with a keen sense of humor. But there is also a deep and secretive side to her, and the reasons for this will become apparent as her story unfolds. She is a very different type of subject to Stuart, who seldom shows emotion but often has detailed memories. I will let her describe her process in her own words. I seem to feel everything. My recall is a blend of seeing, hearing, and feeling. As usual with Rowena, I simply asked her to go back to the most significant life. Once she was into an altered state of consciousness, I began by asking her to describe whatever she could see, hear, or feel. Rowena: it is hot and the sun shines in a blue sky. We are journeying by camel across the desert. It has been a difficult journey and I am tired. My camel is a bad-tempered creature and I will be glad when this day is over and I can rest. What is your name? Joanna asks, and Rowena said, I am called Joseph. Now that Joseph has identified himself, I will use that name rather than Rowena. I thought I might be able to establish his identity by asking his father's name. Daniel, after all, was not just Daniel, but Daniel ben Ezra. Joanna: what is your father's name? Joseph: it's not necessary that you know that. Hitting all kinds of roadblocks. I was beginning to think we might not get too much out of this life, as Joseph was clearly very cautious. However, I persevered. Joanna: do people just call you Joseph then? And Joseph says no, and then he pauses. I am called Joseph of Arimathea. At this point, I almost fell off my chair. This was not simply any old Joseph, but one of the key players in the story of Jesus. It was Joseph of Arimathea, the rich man who asked Pontius Pilate for Jesus' body after the crucifixion, and who prepared the tomb. In Luke chapter 23, verses 52 and 53, we read, This man went unto Pilate and begged the body of Jesus. And he took it down and wrapped it in linen, and laid it in a sepulchre that was hewn in stone, wherein never man before was laid. The unexpected introduction of such a major figure from the biblical record had clearly moved the whole project onto a quite different level, I bet. However, for the moment, I had to hold down my excitement and keep going with the questions. Joanna: do you live in a community? And Joseph says, no, I travel about. And Joanna asks, why do you need to travel? Joseph says, I'm a merchant. I deal in tin and other metals. And then a thought struck me. If Joseph was close to Jesus, he was probably in Essenes. And we'd established that Daniel was too. Did Joseph and Daniel know one another? I took a deep breath and went straight into the big question. Do you know Daniel ben Ezra? Joanna asks, and Joseph says, yes, he is my friend. I had to stop myself from whooping with joy. We had stumbled upon two people who knew one another at the time of Jesus, and one of them was a character recognized in the Bible narrative. All I had to do was put these two subjects into regression together and let them dialogue with one another. There was a good chance that I had found a way around the whole problem of secrecy, which has been such a major issue in all recorded Essene lives. And if you remember, if this sounds too good to be true for you, if you remember, in the beginning of, if you followed Power of the Magdalene, there is a quote that basically says, all of these people that were Essenes, they've made agreements to find each other again, somehow, some way. And wouldn't you know it, this is one of the ways, at least I believe. This session with Rowena was the first of a series of breakthroughs I made while researching these Essene lives. At first, I put it down to good luck. But as the breakthroughs kept piling up, we came to see them as gifts of the Spirit. If the Essenes wanted their story told now, the right people would come at the right time to add their part to the jigsaw. Just how big a picture it would become, I had no idea then. And looking back, perhaps that was just as well. Okay, so now we're going to read chapter 3, which is Joseph and Daniel. And when we're done with that, we will stop there. All right, chapter 3, Joseph and Daniel. I looked forward to the next session with a great feeling of excitement, a sense of making a fresh beginning. The session took place in our house, which overlooks the beautiful valley of the River Burn, in a quiet and rural part of Devonshire. I first ensured that my clients were comfortable, switched on the tape recorder, and settled into my chair. I put both Rowena and Stuart into an altered state of consciousness, took them back to their lives as Joseph and Daniel, and made sure they knew each other. And made sure they each knew that the other was present. After one or two general questions to relax them and get them going, I began to move towards the Essene material. Joanna, what about the Jews who are not Essenes? Do you feel you have much in common with them? And Daniel says, we have a little in common with them, yes, but we feel like Essenes first and Jews second. We don't feel much sympathy for most of the Jews outside our brotherhood. They have chosen what we consider to be a wrong path. We see them as sons of darkness, whereas the Essenes are sons of light. I noted the reference to light. Sorry, I had to pause real quick. I had one of my kids walk in. Okay, so I think I read this. I noted the reference to light, and this is light with a capital L. There is a difference, which was to prove a recurring symbol throughout these sessions. The terms sons of light seemed a very apt name for the Essenes as a group, and underlined the root of their struggle with some of the more conventional Jewish groups, such as the Pharisees. The Pharisees were one of the groups vying for power within Judaism. Their strength lay in their control of the developing rabbinic stream of Judaism. This functioned through the synagogues, which were meeting places, but also places for prayer and instruction in the law. The Jewish law, also known as the Torah, governed many aspects of individual and family life. It was highly structured and codified and laid down detailed observances, including rules on what food was permissible and what one could and could not do on the seventh day or the Sabbath. The Pharisees were aware of the public interest and, although always a minority group, wielded power out of proportion to their numbers. Coming from the middle and artisan classes, they had some understanding of the problems of the common people. The Pharisees stressed ethics rather than theology, subordinating temple worship to the fulfillment of all aspects of the law. But to return to the session with Joseph and Daniel, I wanted to know how they saw themselves in relation to the rest of the world. Joanna asks, do you think of your land as being in the east? Daniel says, no, it is in the center of things, neither east nor west. Joseph, it seems to me as if we are in the middle of the world, with all the trade routes flowing past our door, so we're very much in the center. Then Daniel says, of course, the Romans think Rome is in the center of things. And Joseph says, when you say that, my whole being sighs. What arrogance they have. Daniel, yes, and the strange thing is they don't believe they're doing anything wrong. It seems quite natural to them to go out and conquer people. And Joseph says, heavy feet and everything done in straight lines, too rigid for my taste. Daniel, violence is a habit with them. They strike first and only use their minds afterwards. Joseph, muscular people much given to the wearing of leather, and in the heat here, that's not very wise. And in the heat here, that's not very wise. And then Daniel laughed. Joseph, I'm sure your keen nose remembers. And Daniel just says, and chuckled. His keen nose. Joseph, mind you, in comparison to camel. And then they both laugh. So they're just kind of bantering. From this, it was clear they shared the wariness and distaste of the Roman army of occupation, which many Jews felt at that time. After all, the period of the Roman conquest in 63 BCE was only a generation or two away, and the collective Jewish memory of that event and the restrictions on Jewish life that followed it must have been quite vivid for both Joseph and Daniel. At that point, the Jews would still have been adapting to being a subject people, and it was clearly not a role that many Jews relished. Even from this first exchange, it was quite evident that they had easy familiarity of old friends. Their relationship seemed light and humorous, as if they had known each other for years. Much later in the sessions, I was to find out that Daniel and Joseph had grown up together as children. During a session with Daniel alone, I was able to ask him about this. Joanna asks, "When did you first meet Joseph?" And Daniel says, "I saw him first when we were both quite young. A great friend of mine called James was related to his family, so we wandered around together, a little group of us. You see, our parents were also pursuing the Essene way, so it was natural that we should meet the other young Essenes. I was also able to ask Daniel if he had a favorite story about the younger Joseph. Daniel, well, when he and I were young fellows, there was a time when we had too much wine to drink." He chuckled. "We were visiting one of Joseph's relatives in a little town, but we had too much wine." He laughed and returned, "Ah, yes, a little the worse for wear, to the house of his relative. I think he was a cousin, rather older than we were and more earnest. He did not approve of the drinking of wine, and he locked us out." And here he laughs. "So we had to go away and find some stable somewhere and sleep it off in the straw, and no great harm came to us. We were young and foolish, but I became more abstemious in my old age. I liked a little wine, but Joseph was able to hold his wine better, maybe due to much practice in traveling and being polite to many a host upon the way. So Joseph was not always solemn, you see. He also was young, yes, and I led him astray, and his cousin did not like that." And he laughs again. "That cousin was old before his time and set in his ways. He was fond of quoting from the law and had many quotations to cover drunkenness." And here he laughs. "So yes, it is good for the elders to remember when they were young. This Joseph said to me many times, so that when they think they are altogether wise, they remember their younger foolishness. Indeed, a little foolishness is good because it rounds us out and shows us when we deal with others that we are all human. Joanna, how would you sum up your old friend Joseph?" And Daniel says, "Joseph is a great friend and a wise man, but also a man who is careful in his speech. He is quite strong physically, and there is a calmness and balance about him which impresses people. He listens to people and has a quiet charm and a keen sense of humor, but that's deceptive. He's really quite a clever man, but he hides his gifts. People don't realize the extent of his knowledge. He seems to be just an innocent and shallow pool, but he's really a deep lake, deep and secretive." The ease of their friendship also emerges in another exchange between Joseph and Daniel. So Joseph says, "I had a bigger view of things than you, for my travels took me to many places to talk with many people. But then you were more versed in the detail than I, for I never had much heart for studying. Whereas you, my friend," and then Daniel interrupts him and says, "I had my nose in the scrolls from an early age." That is true. The laughter which Daniel and Joseph shared on that occasion seemed so typical of their friendship. It was a friendship built to survive the test of time. Okay, and so that completes part 1 of the book and the first 3 chapters, I believe. So we're going to start part 2 in the next video, the founding of the Essene Brotherhood. And we're going to read about the Kalu, which were mentioned a few times in Power of the Magdalene. And then we're going to read how the Essene way developed. And I think those will be the only 2 chapters we read because the last chapter in part 2 is a bit longer. So I'll go ahead and I love getting used books. This was what came in my most recent used book. This is St. Anthony. And I love that. It was just found in one of my books. So I keep it as a bookmark. All right. Thank you all so very much for joining me. I love you all so much. And until I see you again for another video, take care of you and take care of those around you. Bye-bye.